stood at the window of her office and watched the mining ships move through the dark. Arcturus Station had been her home for 15 years. She knew every corridor, every machine, every face that passed through its metal halls. She had worked her way up from a simple cargo handler to administrator, and she was proud of what she had built here. But something was wrong. She had felt it for months now, like a splinter buried deep beneath her skin. They had ruled over humanity for 800 years. They were an ancient race, their bodies made of living crystal that caught the light in beautiful and terrible ways. They had found Earth when humans were still fighting wars with primitive weapons. They had offered partnership, protection, a place among the stars. Humanity had accepted, not knowing that partnership meant servitude and protection meant control. Now humans worked across the galaxy. They mined ore on frozen moons. They built ships in orbital factories. They fought in armies that served interests. They were told they were valued members of the Dominion of Ascended Races, the great alliance of 12 elder species that ruled this corner of the universe. Had believed it once, she did not believe it anymore. The numbers on her screen told the truth. For 3 years, she had tracked the tribute shipments leaving Arcturus Station. The official quotas said they owed the Dominion 40,000 tons of processed minerals each cycle, but the actual shipments were nearly double that amount. Someone was taking more than they were supposed to take, and they were hiding it behind layers of false records. She had filed her first complaint 6 months ago. It had disappeared into the vast bureaucracy of the Dominion without a trace. She had filed another, then another. Nothing. No response, no investigation, no acknowledgement that her words had ever been received. Then 3 weeks ago, her mother had called from Earth with fear in her voice. Dominion security officers had visited her home. They had asked questions about her work, about her loyalty. They had smiled and been polite, but the message was clear. Stop asking questions. Turned away from the window. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. She was angry. She was angry for their lies. She was angry at herself for believing those lies for so long. And she was angry at the silence that met every human who dared to speak the truth. Her communication console beeped. A message from Earth, marked urgent and encrypted with codes she did not recognize. She hesitated, then opened it. The message was short, just a name and a location. University of Beijing Advanced Physics Division, and below that, a single line of text that made her heart stop. We found a way out. Far across the galaxy, on the blue and green world that humanity still called home, was running out of time. He was young for a physicist, only 32 years old, with tired eyes and hands that never stopped moving. For 10 years, he had worked on a problem that the Dominion said was unsolvable. They had declared centuries ago that faster-than-light travel could only be achieved through their gate network, the vast web of artificial wormholes that connected the stars. Every species that wanted to travel between worlds had to use the gates, and the gates belonged to the Dominion. Had never accepted this. He had studied the old theories, the ones that human scientists had developed before they came. He had found gaps in the Dominion's logic, small errors that no one else had noticed because no one else had looked. And piece by piece, year by year, he had built something new. His laboratory was hidden in the basement of an old building, far from the gleaming towers where the Dominion's representatives lived. His equipment was outdated and held together with tape and hope, but it worked. God help him, it actually worked. The device on his workbench was ugly. It looked like a metal box covered in wires, with a small crystal at its center that glowed with soft blue light. It was nothing compared to the elegant gates that they had built. But when activated space itself bent around the crystal. Objects placed inside the field could move faster than light, jumping from one point to another without passing through the space between. It was crude, it was dangerous. It ate energy like a starving animal, but it was free. It did not need the gates, it did not need the Dominion's permission. had shared his discovery with a small group of trusted friends. They had helped him test it, refine it, and keep it secret. But secrets never stayed secret forever. Someone had talked. Someone always talked. Now he watched through his window as ships descended through the clouds above Beijing. They were beautiful ships, their hulls covered in crystal patterns that marked them as. The official broadcasts called them a cultural preservation fleet, sent to help humanity protect itself from dangerous and unstable technologies. Knew what they really were. They were an occupation force. They were coming to take his work, silence his voice, and remind humanity of its place in the Dominion's order. He had maybe 6 hours before they found him. 6 hours to make a choice that would change everything. His communication console lit up with messages from across the planet. Other scientists, engineers, dreamers who had heard whispers of his work. They wanted to know if it was true. They wanted to know if there was hope. Sat down and began to type. He did not have time to be careful anymore. He did not have time to be afraid. He sent everything he had to everyone he could reach. The equations, the designs, the test results, all of it scattered across the network like seeds thrown into the wind. Then he recorded a message for anyone who would listen. "My name is," he said, looking into the camera with steady eyes. "For 800 years we have traveled the stars in chains. The Dominion told us their gates were the only way. They lied. I have found another path. It is not easy. It is not safe. But it is ours. They cannot take it from us unless we let them. The gate is open. Walk through it." He sent the message on every frequency he could access. Then he grabbed the metal box from his workbench, stuffed it into a bag, and ran. On Arcturus Station, watched his message play across her screen. Around her, other humans had stopped their work to watch the same broadcast. Some of them were crying. Some of them were laughing. All of them understood what this meant. For 800 years, humanity had been trapped. The gates controlled everything. If the Dominion wanted to punish a colony, they simply closed its gate. No ships could enter or leave. The colony would starve, freeze, or surrender. It had happened dozens of times. It was the invisible chain that bound every human world. But if it was telling the truth, that chain had just been broken. His console exploded with alerts. Dominion security forces were demanding access to the station's communication systems. They wanted to block the broadcast, to stop the message from spreading any further. Her security chief was asking for orders. Her staff was looking at her with wide, frightened eyes. She thought about her mother on Earth, about the officers who had visited her home. She thought about the stolen minerals, the false records, the silence that met every complaint. She thought about 800 years of lies. Then she made her choice. "Block nothing," she ordered. "Let it play. Let everyone hear." The security chief stared at her. "Administrator, if we do that, the Dominion will." "I know what they will do," said. "Let them come." She walked out of her office and into the main corridor of the station. Hundreds of humans were gathered there, watching the broadcast on every screen. His voice echoed through the metal halls, speaking of freedom and fire and a future that belonged to humanity alone. Climbed onto a cargo crate so everyone could see her. The crowd fell silent, waiting. "For 800 years," she said, "we have done what they told us to do. We have worked in their mines and fought in their wars and called them our masters. They told us we were partners, but we were slaves. They told us there was no other way, but there was. A man named just proved it. Now we have a choice. We can go back to our chains and pretend this never happened, or we can stand up together and show them what humanity can do when we stop being afraid." The silence stretched for a long moment. Then someone in the back of the crowd started clapping. Others joined in. The sound grew until it filled the station like thunder, like the beating of a great heart that had been still for far too long. Looked at the faces around her. Miners and engineers, doctors and soldiers, old and young. They were afraid. She could see it in their eyes, but they were also awake, maybe for the first time in their lives. "The gate is open," she said. Let us walk through it together. Across the galaxy on Earth ran through the streets of Beijing with Dominion soldiers close behind him. His bag was heavy with the weight of stolen fire. His lungs burned and his legs ached, but he did not stop. Above him, the sky was full of crystal ships. Below him, the ground shook with the footsteps of an empire that had ruled for 10,000 years. And all around him, on screens and speakers and personal devices, his own voice played over and over again. The gate is open, walk through it. He did not know if anyone would listen. He did not know if humanity had the courage to fight, but he had given them a chance. He had planted a seed that the Dominion could never fully destroy. Now it was up to everyone else to make it grow. The uprising did not begin with gunfire or explosions. It began with silence. On the mining colonies of the Outer Rim, human workers put down their tools and walked away from their posts. On the cargo ships that carried goods between the stars, human crews locked themselves in their quarters and refused to come out. On the military stations where human soldiers served under commanders, those soldiers simply stopped following orders. The Dominion had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. 12 elder species, ancient and powerful, had built an empire that stretched across 1,000 worlds. They had client races to serve them, armies to protect them, and technology that seemed like magic to younger civilizations. They had never imagined that their power could be challenged. But they had made a mistake. They had built their empire on the backs of others, and they had forgotten how much they depended on the workers they despised. Stood in the command center of Arcturus Station and watched the reports come in. Human workers across the Dominion were joining the strike, not fighting, not yet, just stopping. Mining operations ground to a halt. Supply chains collapsed. Administrative systems failed as the humans who ran them walked away. They were furious. Their crystal bodies flickered with angry light as they demanded explanations, threatened punishment, promised rewards for those who returned to their duties. But the humans did not listen. For the first time in 800 years, they had remembered that they had a choice. "We need to coordinate," said communications officer, a young man named David who had been one of the first to join the resistance. "The other colonies are asking for guidance. They want to know what to do next." Thought about the problem. The Dominion controlled all official communication channels. They could listen to anything the humans said, track any message they sent. If the resistance tried to organize through normal means, they would know every plan before it happened. But there were other ways to communicate, ways the Dominion had never thought to monitor. "Do you speak any languages besides Standard?" asked David. He looked confused. "I learned Swahili from my grandmother and some Mandarin in school." "Why?" Smiled. The Dominion had imposed Standard as the common language of all client species. They had dismissed human languages as primitive, unnecessary, not worth learning. Their translation systems could handle them, of course, but no had ever bothered to study them directly. "Find others who speak Old Earth languages," said. "Start sending messages in those languages, hidden inside normal communications. The translation systems will flag them as unimportant cultural artifacts. They will never look twice." David's eyes widened as he understood. He hurried away to spread the word. Across the Dominion, the resistance began to organize through whispers in forgotten tongues, messages hidden in Yoruba poetry and Japanese, battle plans disguised as Russian lullabies, technical specifications encoded in Arabic mathematical notation. They intercepted everything, but they understood nothing. Meanwhile was still running. He had escaped Beijing with the help of a resistance cell that had formed within hours of his broadcast. They had smuggled him onto a cargo ship, then transferred him to a modified freighter that was waiting in orbit. The ship was old and ugly, its hull patched with whatever materials the crew could find. But it carried something precious in its cargo hold, a larger version of his device, built in secret by engineers who had received his plans. The first human ship to travel faster than light without a Dominion gate was called the Prometheus. It was a terrible name, thought. In the old myth, Prometheus had been punished for giving fire to humanity. The gods had chained him to a rock and sent eagles to eat his liver for eternity. But the crew had chosen the name anyway. They knew the risks. They accepted them. Stood in the engine room and watched the device power up. The crystal at its center glowed brighter and brighter until it hurt to look at. The ship shook as space itself began to bend around them. "Everyone hold on," the captain announced over the intercom. "This is going to be rough." The jump was nothing like traveling through a gate. Gates were smooth, almost gentle. This was violent. The ship screamed as it tore through dimensions that were never meant to be crossed. Felt like his body was being pulled apart and put back together wrong. The lights flickered. Something in the walls caught fire. Then suddenly, it was over. They were somewhere else. Stars that had been distant points of light were now close enough to touch. They had crossed half the galaxy in less than a second. The crew cheered. Some of them were crying, just stared at his heart pounding in his chest. "It works," he whispered. "It really works." The Prometheus was not alone for long. Within weeks, other human ships began to appear across the galaxy. They were all ugly, all dangerous, all held together by desperation and genius. But they flew. They flew without permission, without gates, without chains. The Dominion responded with violence. 3 human colonies were destroyed in a single day. They called it necessary discipline. They broadcast images of the bombardment across all channels, showing cities turned to glass and ash. They wanted to remind humanity of the price of rebellion. But the massacres had the opposite effect. Humans who had been uncertain about the uprising now burned with rage. And for the first time, other species began to pay attention. They were an aquatic race who had served the Dominion for 6,000 years. They had accepted their role as junior partners, believing they had no choice. But watching the human colonies burn, they remembered their own dead worlds, their own forgotten rebellions. A diplomat named contacted through secret channels. She was old, her scales faded to silver, but her eyes were sharp. "Your people are brave," said, "but bravery is not enough. The Dominion has crushed 100 rebellions. What makes you think yours will be different?" Thought about the question carefully. "We are not trying to defeat them in battle," she said. "We are trying to break their power. The Dominion rules because they control movement. The gates let them decide who goes where. But we have found another way to travel. If we share that technology with every species, the gates become worthless. The Dominion becomes nothing but 12 old empires with no one left to serve them." Was silent for a long moment. Her gills fluttered as she processed what it said. "You would share this technology freely, even with species who might become your enemies." "Yes," said. "Freedom means nothing if we keep it only for ourselves." The diplomat nodded slowly. "Then I think we need to talk more," she said. "There are others who might want to listen." The alliance grew in secret. The brought in the Crucible Collective, a hive-mind species that had been forced to fragment itself to serve the Dominion's needs. The collective brought in the 1,000 Voices of Meridian, a race of living sound that they had nearly driven to extinction. Each species brought others, until a web of resistance stretched across the galaxy. The Dominion's own arrogance blinded them. They had spent so long believing in their superiority that they could not imagine their subjects working together against them. They saw the human rebellion as an isolated problem, a disease that could be cured with enough fire. They did not see the fire spreading. The human fleet gathered in the darkness between stars. 200 Prometheus ships, crewed by volunteers who knew that most of them would not survive. They came from every corner of human space: miners from Arcturus, soldiers who had deserted their posts, scientists who had left everything behind to join the fight. Stood on the bridge of the lead ship, looking at the faces around him. They were tired and scared and determined. They had given up everything for a chance at freedom. "You all know the plan," he said. "We are not going to attack we are not going to fire a single shot. We are going to give them something much more dangerous than weapons." He held up a data chip. "On this chip is everything. The equations, the designs, the test results. Everything you need to build your own FTL drive. When we reach the system, we are going to broadcast it on every frequency, in every language. We are going to give freedom to the entire galaxy." A young pilot raised her hand. "What happens after that?" Smiled, though his eyes were sad. "After that, everything changes. The Dominion will fall. New powers will rise. There will be chaos and war and suffering. But there will also be hope. For the first time in 10,000 years, every species in the galaxy will have a chance to choose their own path." The pilot nodded. "Then let us give them that chance." The engines hummed as the fleet prepared to jump. Watched the stars shift and blur as space bent around them. "The gate is open," he said softly. "Time to walk through it." The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in the heart of space. 200 ships, battered and appeared where no unauthorized vessel had ever been. They were inside the defense perimeter that had protected the crystalline for 10,000 years. For a long moment, nothing happened. They had never imagined that anyone could reach them without using their gates. Their defense systems were designed to stop ships that approached through normal space. They had no protocol for enemies who simply appeared in their midst. Did not waste the moment of confusion. He began broadcasting immediately on every frequency that human technology could reach. The signal was simple, raw data, unencrypted, free for anyone to receive. The complete specifications for Prometheus FTL technology. "This is of Earth," he said as the data streamed outward. "For 10,000 years, the Dominion has controlled movement between the stars. That control ends today. What I am sending you is freedom. Take it, use it, share it with everyone you know. The gates no longer matter. The chains are broken." The signal spread at the speed of light. It reached the communication networks and passed through them. It reached the ships of a dozen species that were stationed in the system. It reached satellites and relays and deep space probes that carried it farther and farther into the galaxy. The supreme ruler of the Crystalline Empire watched the broadcast from his throne room. His body flickered with colors that no human could name, patterns that showed rage and fear and disbelief. "Destroy them," he commanded. "Destroy them all." The fleet mobilized. Thousands of ships, each one more powerful than anything humanity had ever built, turned their weapons toward the human vessels. The space around them filled with fire as plasma cannons and particle beams tore through the darkness. The Prometheus ships began to die. They were small and weak compared to the warships. Their shields failed under the bombardment. Their hulls cracked and broke apart. Crew members burned in the vacuum or froze in the cold. Watched his people die and did not order a retreat. "Keep broadcasting," he said. "As long as one ship survives, keep broadcasting." The battle lasted less than an hour. When it was over, only 37 human ships remained. More than 5,000 humans had died in the system, their bodies drifting among the wreckage of their fleet. But the signal had reached every corner of the galaxy. Engineers began to build. In the hive minds of the Crucible Collective, new designs took shape. Among the 1,000 voices of Meridian, songs of freedom echoed through their harmonic chambers. And across human space, the Resistance heard the news and knew that everything had changed. Received the report on Arcturus Station. She read the casualty list twice, her hands shaking. So many names she recognized, so many friends she would never see again. But beneath her grief she felt something else. Hope. The Dominion had won the battle, but they had already lost the war. The technology was out. It could not be taken back. Every species in the galaxy now had the tools to break free. She opened a channel to the other resistance leaders. The diplomat appeared on her screen, along with representatives of the collective and the voices, and a dozen other species. "It is time," said. "The signal is out. The Dominion is afraid. If we strike now together, we can finish what started." Nodded, her silver scales catching the light. "The stand with humanity. We have waited 6,000 years for this moment." The collective spoke in its strange, layered voice. "We are one mind again. We remember what we were before the Dominion broke us. We will not be broken again." The thousand voices sang their agreement, harmonies that made its heart ache with their beauty. "Then let us begin," she said. The war that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was not fought between two sides, but between many. The Dominion tried to maintain control, but their forces were stretched too thin. Every time they crushed a rebellion in one system, 3 more rose in other places. Earth itself became the occupation force found itself fighting a war against a population that would not surrender. Humans who had never held weapons learned to fight. Humans who had served the Dominion for generations turned against their masters. The streets of every city echoed with gunfire and the screams of the dying. Led the liberation of Arcturus Station personally. The garrison had fortified themselves in the central hub, threatening to destroy the entire station if the humans attacked anyway. The battle lasted 3 days. When it was over, the station was in bleeding atmosphere from 100 wounds. Half of its forces were dead, but the flag no longer flew over Arcturus. She stood in the ruined command center and looked out at the stars. Other stations were being liberated across the system. Other colonies were rising up. The reports came in faster than she could read them. "They are breaking," David said, standing beside her. "The Dominion is breaking." Shook her head. "Not yet. They still have their fleet. As long as they have those, they will keep fighting." "Then we need to take those from them too," David said. Thought about the 5,000 humans who had died to deliver a message. She thought about the millions more who had died in the centuries of Dominion rule. She thought about what it would cost to finally end this war. "Yes," she said, "we do." The final assault on the took place 3 years after the Prometheus broadcast. By then, the Dominion had fractured into a dozen warring factions. The other elder species had turned on them, blaming them for the collapse of everything they had built. The client species had risen up across the galaxy, some fighting for freedom and others simply fighting for survival. The fleet that approached the system was the largest ever assembled by non-Dominion species. Human ships flew alongside cruisers and collective, and the singing vessels of the 1,000 voices. They came not to destroy, but to end. Commanded the human forces from the bridge of a ship named Hope. It was a new vessel, built with technology that combined human ingenuity with gifts from their allies. It was fast and strong and beautiful, nothing like the ugly Prometheus ships that had started the revolution. Stood beside her. He had survived the first battle, barely. The scars on his face and hands told the story of his escape pod's crash landing on a colony. He had spent 2 years recovering, then immediately returned to the fight. "We have come full circle," he said, looking at the 3 years ago, I stood in a ship like this and watched my friends die." Nodded. "This time will be different." The fleet met them at the edge of their system. It was still powerful, still dangerous, but it was smaller than it had once been. Many ships had been lost in the fighting. Many crews had deserted, fleeing to distant systems where they hoped to escape the coming storm. The battle was long and bloody. Ships burned on both sides. The darkness of space filled with debris and bodies and the screams of the dying. Watched friends fall and enemies die and felt nothing but tired grief. But slowly, inevitably, the line began to break. They requested a ceasefire when his flagship was surrounded by Allied vessels. His image appeared on every screen, his crystal body dim and cracked. "We will discuss terms," he said, his voice empty of emotion. Leaned forward. "There are no terms. Your empire is over. Your gates are worthless. Your client species are free. You can accept that and survive, or you can fight and die. Those are your only choices." The stared at her for a long moment. His species had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. They had believed themselves superior to all other life. And now a human, a member of a race they had considered barely more than animals, was dictating their surrender. "Very well," he said at last, "we accept." The war did not end with that surrender. There were still who refused to give up, still factions of other species who saw opportunity in the chaos. The galaxy had been built on Dominion order for so long that its collapse left a vacuum that violence rushed to fill. But the fighting gradually decreased as new systems of trade and cooperation emerged. The gate network was still there, still useful, but it was no longer the only way to travel. Species that had never been able to visit each other now crossed paths among the stars. Old enemies became trading partners. Old servants became equals. 5 years after the Prometheus broadcast, and stood on the observation deck of a human-built station orbiting Earth. The planet below them was healing, its scars slowly fatting beneath new growth. The sky above was full of ships, human and in collective, and dozens of other species, all moving freely through the space that had once been controlled by the Dominion. "What happens now?" asked. Smiled. "Everything, anything, that is the point." She watched a fleet of Terran Exploration Corps ships depart for unknown space. They were the first human vessels to venture beyond the borders of the old Dominion, seeking new stars that no one had ever visited. "For 800 years we dreamed of the stars," said. "Now the stars are ours." Nodded. He thought about all the people who had died to make this moment possible. The 5,000 who had fallen in the first battle. The millions who had died in the war that followed. The billions who had lived and died as slaves across 8 centuries of Dominion rule. They would never see this day, but their children would. There would. All the generations that came after would inherit a galaxy where freedom was possible, where humanity walked among the stars as equals. The chains were broken, the empires had fallen, and mankind at long last was free. Somewhere out there, beyond the light of familiar suns, new worlds waited to be discovered. New challenges waited to be faced. The future was uncertain and dangerous and full of possibilities that no one could predict. But it belonged to humanity now, not as servants or slaves or clients of an ancient empire, as explorers, as builders, as a species that had looked up at the stars and refused to be told they could never reach them. The gate was open, and humanity was walking through it into a dawn that they had made for themselves.